The Elder Scrolls had a surprise remaster last week, even though we all knew it was happening because of the leaks. But Oblivion has returned to the gaming world with a remaster that makes it look a lot prettier, gives it a lot of modern features, and all around just makes it a better game. That's what we're diving into today. Something I streamed last week. Here is how I've gotten the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered to run on the original Steam Deck. For a quick summary, this is a remaster of Oblivion from way back in the early 2000s. Set 6 years after the events of The Elder Scrolls Morrowind and 200 before the events of Skyrim, you play as a prisoner that is tasked with finding the late Emperor's heir and protect him long enough for him to ascend to the throne and thwart an invasion from the hellish plane known as Oblivion. This remaster is a redone version of the game, giving it a fresh coat of paint and more modern features like dedicated gamepad support on PC, leveling mechanics, replacing a lot of the early generic skeleton enemies with different monsters, and my personal favorite, making it much easier to recover arrows. As far as it running on the Steam Deck, it is certainly possible to get Oblivion to a playable state, but it's going to depend on where you are in the game and what you're doing. To start things off, Oblivion Remastered does give you a lot of graphical settings to tweak. Lots of different settings and presets, the ability to turn ray tracing on or off, resolution scale, upscaling with XE or FSR, and the Steam Deck seems to get a special lowest option for a lot of its settings that Windows PCs do not get. More on that later. At the start of the game, it's easy to get some great performance. After all, Oblivion starts off with you inside a dungeon. You will want to lower most of the settings down to low or lowest, but you can get some nice performance here. It's not going to be perfect, but the frame rate will wander around the 40 to 60 range, even if you crank resolution scaling up to 100% and disable the upscaling. This continues in pretty much every internal enclosed dungeon from caves to the Oblivion towers. These are the most enjoyable parts of this game on the Steam Deck because the performance and FPS shoot way up whenever you enter these locations. The problem is the open world. When you access cities, the open world landscape, and the outside part of Oblivion gates, the performance tanks. You'll almost always get frame rates into the 20s and below if you don't use upscaling or severely dropping the resolution scale. In other words, you need upscaling to bring the frame rate above 30 when you're out and about, and it won't stay there all the time. I personally prefer FSR over XESS as the latter typically has lower frame rates overall. Some areas where FSR got me 50 FPS, XESS would get me 40. I would also not recommend using frame generation. It makes the frame rate jump all over the place with instability and gives you that gigantic amount of FSR3 input lag we saw in the Silent Hill 2 remake. Having to wait almost an entire second between trying to move the camera and it actually moving is far too much of a handicap for an RPG with real-time combat. Now, there are ups and downs to this setup. On the bright side, the game remains acceptably playable most of the time. When you navigate the open world with these settings, it'll stay in the 30s for a lot, with occasional split-second dips into the 20s and more rarely the teens. These drops only last a second before it jumps back up into the 30s, likely from the game loading in more resources as you travel. But it does get rough when you have to fight enemies outdoors. When you initially return with Martin and have to fight some of the assassins, it can dip into the 20s and gets pretty rough on the eyes to try and follow. You can still do it as I did, but it doesn't feel close to being smooth. It also does no favors for how the game looks. Internal areas look fine with the upscaling, but the open world with all of its grass and trees look pretty abysmal, and the models can warp and distort during the more cinematic conversations. That brings me to my recommended settings. While it's a nice feeling to go from 25 to 30 FPS in the open world to a silky 55 to 60 inside dungeons, I'd recommend setting the in-game FPS limiter to 30 FPS. That way you'll get the most consistency throughout the entire experience. All the other settings are pretty much what we described earlier, with everything on low or lowest and FSR set to its ultra performance setting. It's not gonna look good, but you kind of need it that way to get this level of performance. That brings us to other handheld PCs. How does the Lenovo Legion Go handle this game? not well. Windows-based devices seem to not have access to the lowest labeled versions of settings that the Steam Deck does, and the Legion Go will hard force itself to run the game at its native resolution up at 1600p. Even with FSR3 Ultra Performance Mode, the opening of the game inside the jail cell barely exceeds 47 FPS. What you're looking at right now is the Legion Go being forced down to a resolution of 1080p because I have it plugged into my TV, and it still can't even hit 50 in that internal intro level. So that begs the question, why not just play the original? It's aged, sure, but it's available on the Steam Deck and plays pretty much perfectly, right? Well, it does, but there are some handicaps you have to deal with when you play the original Oblivion on PC. So let's do a quick comparison. First, the original game does run basically perfect. 60 FPS all across the board no matter where you are. Open world, dungeons, cities, etc. It plays flawlessly, occasionally dropping to like 58 FPS and pushing itself right back up. But the main problem with the original on the Steam Deck is controls. Oblivion never got official gamepad support on PC despite being a PS3 and Xbox 360 game. It still relies on a mouse and keyboard function. While there is a very good community layout for the Steam Deck, there are some handicaps, like needing to hold R2 to be able to drop items out of your inventory, and that not really working and the game glitching up half the time, not letting you actually drop the items, and the reliance on the mouse cursor. Every dialogue choice and menu requires you to manually click on options with the mouse. And with the way Oblivion was designed, you can't just tap the touchscreen of the Steam Deck to emulate a mouse click. On most of these menus, you have to actually physically drag the cursor over the setting before it will allow you to select it, be it with the R2 trigger or with a touchscreen tap. You can definitely get used to this, but it makes it a hassle to manage your inventory and go through the menus. Now let's get back to the remaster with battery life. Oblivion Remastered will give the original Steam Deck a battery range of about 2 hours. For the sake of comparison, the original Oblivion will get the original Steam Deck a range of about 3.5 hours. As we wrap up, all of this makes it hard to recommend or not recommend this remaster. It's great when you're in a dungeon, but the open world is something you have to consider since you're going to be in said open world so much. Normal exploration, I think, is acceptable, but the fighting outdoors gets real awkward, especially if you play a more precision character like the stealthy archers I like to use in Elder Scrolls. Though a possible bright side here is that Oblivion Remastered also isn't that well optimized on consoles either. The PS5 Pro struggles to maintain 60 FPS, and the normal PS5 struggles to keep the game over 45 to 50 FPS a lot of the time. With that in mind, there will likely be performance patches made soon to fix that, just as they did a quick patch when the Anniversary Edition accidentally broke the Switch version of Skyrim, and they fixed it less than 2 weeks later. But we'll have to wait to find that out. So as of right now, in April 2025, I would probably recommend Oblivion Remastered to Steam Deck users, but only if you're willing to go through a lot of frame dips and some pretty low res stuff in the open world. I'd personally wait for patches, play the original game, which plays flawlessly, if you're okay dealing with the mouse controls, or possibly waiting for the rumored Nintendo Switch 2 port that's allegedly in development right now. And that's all I have for you today. I'll be back soon with more Steam Deck performance and reviews. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.